What's up, solar nerds? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to crunch some numbers. Who's up for that? Wanted to put this together for a while now. This is going to be my how to build your system, how to design your solar system, your panels, your inverters, your batteries, that sort of thing. So let's just dive right into it, huh? I'll try to keep this brief. Here we go. All right, so number one, I put together this document here. This should kind of guide us through here. So number one, we need to figure out how much power we're going to be requiring our inverter to produce at any one given time. So this would be, what are all the different things you want to have on at the same time while you're running on your battery or your solar panels individually. So think of things like TVs, lights, refrigerators. Do you want your air conditioning running? Do you want your oven running? Air fryers, things like that. So in order to do this, basically what we want to do is figure out what the watt requirement is from each item, and it'll say it either on the device or you could figure it out if you use a tool like this. This basically plugs in the wall, then you plug the device in here, and you put a clamp on ammeter right here to determine how much it's pulling. I'll put a link to this in the description. But most devices have their power rating, so say like a microwave. Typical microwave is 1,000 watts. So, you'll take it from there. In my case, I knew that my number needed to be 12,000 watts. That is going to give me one full 240 volt, 50 amp outlet, which it was going to allow me to run my solar, charge my solar cars, my wife's car and my car. So I knew I needed split phase 240 volt and be able to do 12,000 watts. Okay, so next number two here, you're going to have to figure out how many hours each device will be used per day. So basically now we're trying to figure out how much total power do we need to store in order to feed all of those devices all day, assuming, power outage or if you're off grid completely. Now keep in mind, I do have a little note up here that this is assuming most of your power use is not during the daylight hours. I mean, you could put together enough solar panels that could charge your batteries and deliver your load throughout the day. I mean, there's a lot of different variables. So I'm just pointing that out. This is more of a charge all day, use it all night sort of a situation. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, think of things like how many hours on the TV, how many meals am I going to cook, and when am I going to cook them in? Do I want my water heater on? How long does that run? How many times a day does it run, and for how long, and how many watts is that? These are the things you want to come up with. Now, if you have a system that can do that for you, great. This right here, this is called Emporia. I have this installed in my panel, and this actually shows me all the different items, what my usage is. I can do it, down to the second, or I can do, weekly or monthly. This tells me right here, in a month. Oh, hot tub, what a surprise. The heater and the furnace, they're next up. The water heater, the car, oops, etc. So this is nice. It takes a bit to install this. You actually have to open up the panel and put clamp on sensors on each of the legs that you want to monitor. And then it has a big one for the total usage. So that one's nice right here, total usage. So 0.824 right now for me. This is a way of figuring it out as well. This is kind of overkill though. But you want to just think about each device and kind of try to add it up. Once you have those numbers, you're going to multiply the numbers. You're going to multiply the hours by the watts to get your kilowatt hour reading. or number, and that's what's going to allow you to size your battery bank. So you're basically figuring out how much juice you need to store in order to feed all of those devices for all of the amounts of times that you determined. Okay? Next up, we got to think about the solar panel. So now we got to collect that much energy. So assuming you have 5 hours of sunlight per day, and this is like the rule of thumb, and 75% efficiency on the power rating of the panel, we're going to determine how many panels you'll need. So I gave this example. A 460 watt panel will most likely give you an average of 345 watts over the course of 5 hours. That's that 75% rule. So if you need to collect 34 kilowatt hours of power, then you're going to need 20 of those 460 watt panels, because 345 times 5 hours times 20 panels is 34,500, or 34.5 kilowatt hours. So that's how you'll determine how much energy you'll need to store if we're in the case where we're charging during the day and using it at night. On top of that, we want to determine how much power at any given time those panels are going to be feeding into the inverter. So if we take the 345 and multiply that by our 20 panels, that's going to give us a maximum PV input, or PV is another way of saying solar panel, is 6,900 watts in this case. Okay? So we're almost there. Now, once we've determined the size and the quantity of the panels, then we're going to want to select the panels that we, figure out which panels we want, and then take note of the VOC, which is volts open circuit, for the panel. Now, in this case, I'm using these panels right here, and if we scroll down, you'll see that they are 50.8 volts. This is the VOC, volts open circuit. This means if you were pointing the panel directly at the sun and you had a meter on the positive and negative of the panel, it would produce 50.8 volts maximum. All right, that's going to be important when we're deciding how to wire, or what inverter to get, and how to organize the panels. All right, so now we can select our inverter. We're going to use the max output number from item number 1, so that's how much juice at one given time, and then the maximum PV input from item 4B, which we just discussed. And then we also need to determine, do we need 240 volt or not, or just 120? And the very important part here is, if you do need 240 volt and you are in the United States, you need to get an inverter that is split phase 240 volt. If it just says 240 volt and it does not say split phase, that is the wrong inverter. Do not buy that. That will destroy your devices. You need a split phase inverter, because the devices made for United States use are made for split phase. So I hope I've stressed that enough. Okay, so in my case, I needed split phase 240 because I'm trying to charge cars as fast as I possibly can, and they required a NEMA 1450 240 volt 50 amp outlet. So in order for me to achieve split phase with the inverters that were available to me in my price range, I actually needed to get 2 inverters, because the setup of the MPP Solar LV6048 that I bought, which was capable of split phase, required you to have 2 of them in order to achieve that split phase. So that's also something you need to consider. Some inverters need that. Now, I've seen newer ones that don't need to have a second one, but just keep that in mind. Okay, so back down here to number 6. So your inverter will have a maximum output rating in watts or kilowatts. In this case, I needed one that could do 12,000. And actually, the inverters that I got, they were 6,000 each, but since I had to have two, when you combine them, they equaled 12,000 anyway, so it kind of worked out perfectly. I feel like they probably did that on purpose if they were offering 240-volt split phase anyway. Also, next up here, most inverters, or at least many that I've seen, will have two PV solar inputs. So you can put half of your panels on one, half on the other. That way you don't risk, going past the threshold. I'll get into that a little bit more here. And then here I just reiterate again what I was talking about for the 240 volts. So if you need to power, say, like your electric car, or if you want to power your house from the system like I do, so I have an interlock setup which feeds power from a generator into a 240 volt breaker that powers both legs of the panel. You will need to then have a split phase 240 volt output in order to power your house, in most cases. So keep that in mind. If you're planning on just feeding this into your breaker box, best bet would be to do the split phase setup. Again, your large air conditioners, they're going to need that kind of power. Residential ovens, clothing dryers, water heater might need it, depending. So those are the things you'll need to consider when choosing the inverter. And then now that we have our numbers, we can select our batteries. You're going to match the voltage of the batteries to the inverter. So the inverter will require either 12 volt, usually that's for like mobile, van setups, or 48 volt, mine are 48 volt. And then when you're choosing batteries for those, they're going to have an amp hour rating on them. You had your kilowatt hour rating that you needed to match from up above here. In order to get the kilowatt hour rating, all you need to do is multiply the amp hour by the voltage. So if it's 48 volts, you would multiply that by whatever the amp hour rating is. So for instance, the batteries that I have now, they are 48 volt, 220 amp hour. So that gives me 10,560, and I have three of them. So it's 31,680 that I actually have. And that's just the rating. Actually, they go higher than that, but that's kind of like their floor. So that's how you would choose the batteries. You just make sure you buy the same voltage battery as what the inverter requires, and then you can put them in parallel to keep the voltage the same. Or you can buy, say, if it was a 48 volt inverter, you could buy 4 12 volt batteries and put them in series to add up to 48. And I'll show you that in a slide that I have coming up here soon. So just keep that in mind. You need to match the batteries to the inverter. All right, so on that note, I have this diagram that I put together of basically my system, or kind of a snapshot of it. So we've got the inverter at the top. Now keep in mind I have two, but this is just for demonstration purposes here. So I have three batteries, and you can see the positive and negative here. If I connect all the negatives together and connect that negative to the negative on the input for the batteries on the inverter, and the positives all connect together, that is parallel. So the resulting voltage is going to be 48 volts, just like it says here. Over here, if you take a look, if I put those three batteries in series, so I'm connecting the negative to the next positive and that negative to the next positive, and taking the output negative of this one, positive of this one, that will result in 144 volts. If you try to feed that into this inverter, you'll most likely destroy it. So keep this in mind. You don't want to ever have an issue where you've wired these wrong and then you input into the inverter. That would be Very bad. Hopefully the inverter would have some sort of test before it engaged, but you never know. Okay, so over here to the solar panels, this is where a lot of those numbers start coming in. So remember that volts open circuit number that we figured out on the panel that I own? So this 50.88 here. We need to consider that because if I open up the manual for my inverter, that's right here, and I find out what it's capable of, it will allow me to have 145 volts DC max going into its PV input, solar input. So we don't ever want to get there. We want to be, well below that. So what we want to do is make sure all of the voltage going into any one of those PV inputs is less than 145. So back to the diagram. If they're 50.8 volts open circuit, that means I can put two of them together in series. That will add up to the 101.6 volts. And then I would parallel two more and two more and two more and two more like I do to get 10. And that is how I can stay below that rating. So two of them in series, and then those two paralleled to the next two, paralleled to the next two. And when we say parallel, we basically look at it like, when we put these two in series, that's now one panel. So we have the positive of the one side and the negative of the other is now being parallel connected to the other three and the other two sets in this configuration. And keep in mind, the red and black intersecting wires do not connect here. So there's no connection there, and there's no connection there. Just keep that in mind. So basically, in this case, I can string together my 5 sets of 2, and that should get me, if we did the math right, that would get me the 3450 or 3,450 watts of solar if I'm using 10 panels. Okay? Now remember, we have to always check what we can handle here, and on my inverter, it has solar charging input of 4,000 watts by 2, meaning it has 2 PV inputs. Each one is capable of 4,000 watts. So if I use 10 of the 460 panels, 10 of these, and rated at 75% of what they're saying they are, gets me the 345. I could use 10 of them and stay below 4,000. Now I can demonstrate this here. This is my setup right here on a sunny day. And this is my solar assistant. You can see that in one of my other videos. But I opened up a sunny day here. So this is February, so I'm not getting my max. But if you notice this chart right here, this MPPT power, there are 2 different lines here, one for each leg. I'm using 2 different legs, but you notice they add up to the same thing. And that's only 3,000 watts right now. So 10 of the 460s are giving me 3,000 watts at the highest point of the sun here in the winter time. In the summer, that's like 3,500. So I'll get about 3,500. And that pretty much nails that 75% number that I was telling you. So I'm well below the 4,000 watts anytime. So that's how I would stack those, and that's how I did stack them. So I've got 10 panels going into the one input and 10 panels going into another input on my second inverter. So you can see, though, if down here in the left-hand corner at the bottom, this is just an example. What if I put 4 panels together? What would that do? That would give me 203.2 volts. So that is way above what my max input of 145 is. So I cannot do 3 panels. I can't even do 3 panels. 3 panels would be more than 150 volts. So I can only do 2 panels in series. But remember, in parallel, the voltages don't add. In series, they add. Okay? So voltages add in series, they do not add in parallel. Just like the batteries, same thing as the batteries. They're adding in series to 144. They're not adding in parallel. They stay 48. So same thing happens to the solar panels. So this is what you would do in order to get an idea of what you really need and what you should actually, how you should size your system. Now, like I said, this is assuming you're charging all day and then using that power at night, like I do. But if you, or let's say you're running your house or running an off-grid house, you probably use a lot of that power during the day. So if you have enough solar panels to charge your batteries and provide the power you need during the day, then you would need less batteries. You might need more solar panels though in order to achieve that. So you have to kind of weigh that out. How much am I using during the day? And that's going to then subtract from the amount of energy you're putting into the batteries. So you'll need to offset that with more solar panels. So keep that in mind. Other than that, that's pretty much it. I know I kind of went over a lot of different stuff, and this is semi-high level, although this should give you a really good idea of what you need to do. If you have any questions, please send those to the comments down there, and I will be happy to answer them. And if you would please subscribe to the channel. I got a lot more content coming. I'm trying to get this channel big so I can show a lot more people. And other than that, you stay classy, solar nerds. Take it easy.